Welcome everyone to our presentation on Bluebeam Sets. Figure we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to do is give you a little overview about what sets are and what they can be used for. Sets allow users to open a collection of documents in a single view, with the pages organized in a specified sorted order, including any revisions. Users can navigate through multiple files as though they were one document, without actually merging them into a single file. And additionally, files that cannot be combined due to PDF security or digital signatures can be viewed as a cohesive collection. And previous versions can be stacked. So you can easily scroll through and see the revision history of a file and always know what the most recent version is. It'll make more sense once I actually demonstrate it. So the first thing to do is to go to the Sets tab. This little button over here, if you don't see it, you can right click, show sets, and it will show up here. You close that. So you go to the sets dropdown and you go to new set. And this first little window appears. You can add files. You can add files you have open. You can add a folder of PDFs, or you can add a folder and including subfolders of PDFs. I'm going to go to add files. These sample files are available on the P drive. If you go to the P drive and then 23 projects Genesis, there is a Bluebeam Sets presentation folder with a zip file inside. You can copy that zip file to your desktop and extract it, and you can follow along if you want to. So I'm going to select all these and add them. Before I do want to note that if you have future revisions that you want to add and replace previous revisions, I suggest that you separate those into folders and add them in stages. If you add all of them, including multiple revisions all at once, it can be problematic. So I'm going to add all of these. The next option you should be aware of is this one, this little checkbox, use relative paths. Essentially what this means is when we save this set file, it saves as a .bex file extension. As long as the set file and the PDFs are moved together and they stay in the same position relative to one another, the set will work if this is checked. If this is unchecked, then the set file can be moved around, but the PDFs have to stay where they originally were when they were added to the set. In general, using relative paths is almost always your best option, especially if a project gets archived and everything gets moved from the P drive to the Q drive. Using relative paths will mean the set still functions. If this is unchecked, it won't. Show paths simply shows you where the files that you added are physically located. The next thing is the options button. Now the options button opens this little window, which has 3 tabs: sorting, categories, and tags. The sorting tab, you basically, for the most part, want to leave everything above this previous revisions line at the default. All the show and sort by, basically, I wouldn't change them. There are other options here, but they're generally a worse option than the default setting. This one especially, stack multi-page documents, you want to make sure is unchecked. If this is checked, if you add multiple multi-page PDFs, it will not compare page to page. It just compares file to file. So make sure this is unchecked if you're adding multi-page documents. The revision filter section here, these 3, would only apply if we had a naming standard that included the revision in the name of the file, which we don't use here at Genesis. So I would just ignore this. If we did include like a Rev1, Rev2 in the file name, you could set this to wildcard and you could specify a wildcard syntax here, but we don't do that, so just ignore this for now. From here on down, this is important. The previous revisions dropdown basically controls how previous revisions display in the thumbnail, which I'll demonstrate. It'll make more sense once I do, but you can hide them, make them not show. You can gray them out, basically makes previous revisions a gray box. Cross out puts a red X on the thumbnail, and show will show it as normal. Again, this does not modify the PDF. It only modifies the appearance of the thumbnail of previous revisions, and I think cross out is the best one. The current revisions drop down basically controls how revisions are displayed. The stack, which is the default, stacks all the pages that are it's the same sheet, but multiple revisions. It puts them in a stack that you can flip back and forth through. I think that's the superior option here. Highlight will show them all and puts a yellow highlighted border around the current revision. I find that much more confusing, which I can show you once we create the set. So I would leave this on stack. Copy markups to newly added revisions. What this does is when you add a new revision of a sheet, if there were any markups on a previous revision of the sheet, it will copy those markups to the new revision of the sheet. If you don't want to do that, obviously uncheck this, but this will only copy the markups from the previous revision. It will not copy all markups from all previous revisions. So, but if you keep this checked on, as you add more revisions, it will copy them all the way through, if that makes sense. This is pretty straightforward. This will unflatten markups on a sheet before it copies them. If this is unchecked and a markup is flattened, it will not copy it. And then this option will flatten all markups after it has been copied, after they've been copied to the new revision. The last option here is an important one. When you add a new revision to a set, this will place a stamp that reads superseded over the previous revisions. This will modify the PDF. It actually physically places a stamp on the drawing. You can obviously go back and delete it if you don't want it, but this will change the modified date of the file. Keep that in mind. So if you're, say, adding files that you don't want to be changed, such as files from the issues folder, you don't want this checked on. If you're creating a stick set where you're copying issued PDFs to the stick set folder, then this probably should be checked on. But just keep in mind of what this does and decide whether you want that on or not. I'm going to leave it on for now. The next tab, categories, basically controls how the set will sort added PDFs into categories. So we've set this up here at Genesis to have all of our disciplines with our sheet numbering standard sorted into categories, and we sort demolition into their own categories too. If you don't see this, which you might see a different list here, chances are you have the default Bluebeam category list, and I'll show you how to fix that. Let me cancel this real quick. If you go to Review, Preferences, and then the Sets option here, the default template should read Genesis. Bluebeam comes with one that's called Construction, but you want to make sure this is set to Genesis. If you don't see this, if you don't have the Genesis template, then you can come to the Categories section of the Preferences, and you can go to Load, and that is stored in the S drive, Bluebeam, Profiles, Categories, Genesis, and you can load that in. Once it's loaded in, you can swap. See, this is the construction one that has things like landscape in it. And then we can swap to Genesis. But swapping this doesn't change your default. This is just, you can modify it here. You can add new categories. You can delete categories. But you need to go back to set options and make sure this default template is set to Genesis. Let me just redo what I just did. You can resort them here if you wanted to. You can move them up and down, add new ones, or delete them, but this will not affect the template. This will just affect this set in particular. So moving on to the final tab, the tags tab. Tags are basically information about the PDFs that you want stored in the set. This will come into play later when we export a drawing log. You can export a log of all the PDFs in a set that has all this information here. You can add new ones. You can add custom ones, either text, date, or number parameters. And there's also a default list of ones that come with Bluebeam that are already made for you, like, say, project number, project description. You could do, say, revision date and hit OK. And it will add this tag to all the sheets, essentially. The auto mark column basically is telling Bluebeam that you can pull this information from the title block of the sheet itself. basically you could say, hey, take the information from this box and go through all the sheets and find the information there, and that's what I want you to use for the tag. If you don't think you can get this information from the title block, you can simply uncheck this and you can fill it in manually. So go ahead and hit OK. And I'm going to hit OK and actually create our set. So when you hit OK, this dialog box comes up here. And it shows the file name, page label, all this stuff. I added these two previously, so this is stored in the PDFs now. I just didn't add it this time. You can see revision date is blank because I unchecked automark. You can fill this information in manually. You just click the cell. You can't type right in the cell, but you can type up here. This is a date parameter, so you have to physically pick it from a calendar. If this was a text parameter, you could type it in. You can control click multiples, or you can just shift click and do them all. And that will store that information in the PDFs. Hit OK. It applies the tags to the sheets. And hit OK. If any of these, sometimes when you create a set, it'll ask you to choose a box that contains sheet number or that contains project number or sheet name, etc. And you can always, same as setting page labels, you can just draw a box around that area and it will pull that information from that box on every sheet. So as you can see here, we have categories. Categories that don't appear in the set, you don't have any blank categories here. For example, there's no cover sheet files here that start with CS, so it doesn't list that category. But all the ones that start with G get sorted under general, and that is a collapsible category. Now, the way that this differs from a combined PDF is these are still individual files. So if I click on one, it will open that file and only that file. The advantage of this is that multiple people can have this set open at the same time and be in these drawings. You obviously can't have one person in the same sheet file at the same time, or two people in the same sheet file at the same time, but multiple people can have the set open, unlike a combined PDF where only one person can be in the combined PDF and people get in each other's way a lot. It's also a lot smaller this way. A combined PDF can be very large in size, whereas a set file is only a few kilobytes because it's really just a list of shortcuts. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save the set, and I'm going to save it in the same folder. I'm just going to call it test set. Okay, and now that's saved as testset.bex. This button here will show or hide thumbnails if you would rather just have a list of each discipline's drawings. You don't need the thumbnail. You can turn the thumbnails on and off. If you want to add more revisions to a set, you can just go up to the Add Files to Set button. Brings up the same window as before. And I'm going to add, again, adding each revision at a time. I'm going to add the Rev 1s, and then I'll add the Rev 2. I hit OK. It brings up the same window. Notice that these are not filled out. These were to be manually filled out if you wanted them to be. OK. And now this window will appear, asking you to match pages. So it's essentially saying, I found this one with this page label, and we think, Bluebeam saying, I think it's the same one as this one. And you just confirm that they are indeed the same sheet, and you hit OK. And it'll tell you here, we have copy markups from current pages selected. We have stamp current pages superseded selected. So I'm going to hit OK. It's going to replace pages. And now if you look down here, you'll see these two have a little arrow. So we can flip back and forth between the revisions. You can see the older revision has an X. That's what that cross out option did. And it is stamp superseded. If I open the file, the superseded stamp is here. It's not flattened, but it is here. The X is not here. The X is just on the thumbnail. And you can flip back and forth between multiple revisions. I'm going to add my Rev 2. Okay. 2.2.1. Yep. It's going to add yet another revision. And now I can go back between all three. And all older ones are stamp superseded with an X. So you can see the oldest one. Additionally, if you do have multiple revisions, you can just right click and you can compare documents or overlay pages. If you want an overview of these functions, I covered that in the first Bluebeam presentation, Bluebeam 101 basics and markups. But these are essentially ways to compare the differences between documents. Okay. Next thing I want to touch on is sharing sets. So if you want to share a set with someone else, you can send the BEX file to them if use relative paths is not checked. Otherwise, you can just send them the location of the BEX file. If someone is not in network or doesn't have access to our server, you can publish the set to a combined PDF or a PDF package. So if we go to sets, the little drop down, we have a bunch of options here. First of all, we can select all, and this will select all sheets, including previous revisions. You can see they have the blue border around them. You can select just the latest revisions. So you can see just the latest one selected, or you can select previous revisions. So only older revisions that have a newer one are selected here. Once you've selected the ones that you want, which is generally latest revisions, you can then publish. And there's three options for publishing. You can publish them to a combined file, which is essentially just making a combined PDF of the ones that you have selected. So that's a very traditional combined PDF that I'm sure you're familiar with. The second option is a PDF package. So if you hit PDF package, what a PDF package is essentially it functions as a zip file, but it's basically a list of links, just like the set is. You can add folders, you can add files to it, but if you send someone this, it's packaged as a PDF, but in that PDF, it has links to the PDFs in the set. The PDFs in the set will remain where they are. This is just a link to it, essentially. Save. And your third option is to publish a drawing log, to export a drawing log. A drawing log, and this is where those tags come in from when we set the setup. When you export a drawing log, you can select what information you want to export. All of these are checked by default. You can see some of these are built in. These are built into Bluebeam, and some that we added. These tags here we added. So you don't have to include all of these. Like I don't think we need file path, etc. File name, we'll leave category. Rid of that. Whether or not it's superseded, the revision date, the project number, and this is where we filled this information out manually. So if you really want to be detailed, you make sure all this is correct. And then when we hit next, this option comes up. You can export it as an Excel file, a PDF, or a comma delimited Excel file. You can set the title of it. This says to prepend the set name. So this is going to say test set drawing log. You can toggle that on and off. You can put the date at the end if you want. You can exclude all superseded sheets. And you can create hyperlinks. This essentially will hyperlink to the PDFs in the drawing log. The drawing log does not include the PDFs themselves, but this will create a hyperlink to it. If you uncheck this, it'll just give you a list of the PDFs in the set, and it will not include links to them. This chooses where you want to export it to. If you do this a lot, you can overwrite the existing file if it already exists there. This will open it up after it's made. And this check automatically export when saving the set. So every time you go to save set under this dropdown, it will export this drawing log, which is when you would want overwrite existing file set. So every time someone saves the set, it would just overwrite the log. You can do that if you want. This down here will only become available if you choose to export the log as a PDF. If you do, you can add the drawing log to the set. And you can set the page size, different templates, etc. I'll leave it Excel for now. You know what? Let me open file after creation. That's fine. It'll open in Excel, and here you have all the information that we chose to include, including project number, revision date, whether or not it's been superseded, the label, the category, aka discipline, the file name, etc. So you can send someone this file, and these are hyperlinked to the PDFs themselves. The next way you can share a set, I guess you could call it that, is by printing it. You can print a set. You can print all, print just the latest revisions, or print just the previous revisions. This is very useful when you want to print these to hard copy, to actual paper. You can just print the latest revisions of the set. So if somebody wants a physically printed stick set, if you've been keeping it up to date all this time by adding new issued documents as they're issued, it'd be very easy to just print the latest versions of all those PDFs. As far as Studio, Bluebeam Studio goes, you can upload a set to a Studio project, but you have to upload both the BEX file and the individual files themselves. They also have to be uploaded from the same root folder they're originally created in, and make sure use relative paths is checked in the set options. Otherwise, sets function just like normal files in projects do. Was there any questions?
There was a question, where should we be saving these files sets on the network?
Do you want to answer that one, Will?
Okay. So really comes down to what is going on, what the purposes are. There was just a standard released to the company, the PMs, where we are looking at using stick sets, using sets in Bluebeam as an option for stick sets. So that would be a way of doing it inside the stick sets folder. I know that architecture, they use a different reason than stick sets. They use it as their way of markups throughout, and they put the files inside the Bluebeam Studio environment under projects. So kind of looks at the situation. Stick sets versus weekly markups and drawings can vastly be different. So we don't want to intertwine them. They have different purposes. There isn't a designated location for the markups on the network. For architecture, the cloud just seems to work better, so people can access it directly anywhere.
Yeah, good answer, Will. Basically, it doesn't really matter where you save the set file as long as when you do save it, that it doesn't move relative to the PDFs that you added to it, if use relative paths is checked. Whatever works best for your team, I guess, and as long as it's the location of that set file is communicated to everyone that needs access to it, then we don't really have a standard of where to put it. So that's about all that there is to cover on this topic, actually. Thanks for coming.